It was supposed to be a regular government update. The whole country was watching. Schools stopped morning assembly. Offices set up screens. Even the streets were quieter than usual. President Cyril Ramaphosa was about to speak live on national TV about South Africa's role in the African Union. But something felt different. On the news desk was a white envelope, no name, just a red wax seal with Burkina Faso's symbol. Ramaphosa paused. The camera zoomed in. "Just handed to me minutes before going live," he said quietly, "from Captain Ibrahim Traoré." People in the studio started whispering. The president looked uneasy but carefully opened the seal. He slowly unfolded the thick paper and read the first lines. His lips parted. He looked up, then back down. For the first time in years, South Africans saw something rare. President Ramaphosa was shaking and the letter had just started. The broadcast was silent. Comment sections were full. What's in that letter? Did Traoré reveal something? Why? Does Ramaphosa look like that? Ramaphosa tried to read out loud. At first, he couldn't. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. To the Honourable Leader of South Africa. I write not as a president, but as a son of Africa who cannot sleep at night. The whole studio stood still. Traoré's words weren't political. They were personal. I see children starving in Lasso. I see teenagers drowning in the Mediterranean, chasing Europe. I see brothers in Nigeria losing faith in democracy. And I ask myself, what has become of us? The camera showed Ramaphosa's face. His eyes were wet. One hand held the podium tightly. I have tanks. I have guns. But I lie awake at night. Knowing a mother in Kiesha cries because she can't feed her child. People gasped. A journalist turned away, wiping tears. This wasn't a strategy or PR. It was one leader pouring his heart out to another. Suddenly, Traoré's letter was trending globally. But the letter had only just begun. And Ramaphosa hadn't yet read the part that would break him. His hands were shaking now. The paper trembled as he read the middle of the letter. Then came a line. He read it once. Then again, his lips moved silently. The studio waited. Finally, he whispered, "If we, the ones with power, sleep peacefully while our people suffer, then we are not leaders. We are the final betrayal." Silence. The president looked up, trying to stay calm, but a tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. What are we building if the bones of our people pave the path? Traoré had written. Ramaphosa broke down. On live national TV, he dropped the letter on the desk and turned away. His shoulders shook. He was crying not as a politician, but as a man. The control room didn't cut the feed. They couldn't. The truth was too strong. The world was watching. Africa was watching. People across the continent were now crying too. But the most emotional part of the letter, Traoré's personal story, was still unread. No one moved. Not the journalists, not the crew. Even the president's advisors stood frozen. What was supposed to be a policy speech had now become something completely different. Ramaphosa had stopped reading, but the audience wanted more. A voice behind the camera asked, "Should we cut to break?" The producer shook his head. "Ah, you crazy? The world is watching." Social media exploded. TikToks were being made. What did Traoré write that made Ramaphosa cry? In the control room, a new instruction came. Keep the cameras rolling. No matter what, back in the studio, Ramaphosa finally picked up the letter again. His voice was barely steady. Captain Traoré writes, Africa is not broken, she is bruised, and her healing will begin the day her leaders stop whispering and start feeling. Somewhere in Johannesburg, a 14-year-old girl tweeted, "Why does this letter sound like something my soul has been waiting to hear?" The president folded the letter slowly. Then he said something that shocked the whole country. "Play the tape." The screen behind him lit up. Then came the clear voice of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calm/steady, but full of emotion. "To the people of South Africa, to my brother, President Cyril Ramaphosa, I did not write this letter for applause. I wrote it because I am tired of silence. I am tired of hearing African languages in refugee camps, but not in boardrooms. Tired of seeing African brilliance exported while African children eat from the ground." The studio was completely silent. Traoré continued speaking. "This continent is bleeding from wounds. We no longer talk about hunger, stolen resources, fear of speaking the truth. But we don't need pity, we need courage. And if you Ramaphosa fail to act, we don't deserve our titles." Another tear fell from Ramaphosa's eye. This wasn't politics. This was the truth, spoken with courage. "This is not a war cry," Traoré said in closing. "It's a wake-up call, and time is running out." The screen went black. Even Twitter seemed to pause. But what happened next wasn't just surprising, it felt like fate. By the next morning, people all across the country had read the letter. In Cape Town, street vendors printed out parts of the speech and gave them to strangers. In Soweto, a group of teenage boys stood around a phone, listening to Traoré's voice over and over. One was crying. "What kind of leader talks like this?" One asked. "Why don't ours sound like that?" Said another. Radio stations stopped their morning music to replay the letter. Taxi drivers paused to listen. Teachers played it in classrooms. A nurse in Durban streamed it for waiting patients. And in Limpopo, an old man looked up from his wooden bench and said softly, "We haven't heard words like this since Mandela." But the most emotional reaction came from an unexpected place. In Kaitsa, a mother of 3 posted a video. "I've never seen Ramaphosa cry before," she said. "But when he read that letter, I cried too because, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen." The video got 1 million views in 3 hours. But then South Africa found out Traoré hadn't sent the letter to Ramaphosa only. The ripple effect had just begun. That night, a clip from the broadcast reached a faraway village in Puma. In a small house with a leaking roof, 10-year-old Ayanda sat beside her grandmother. Her phone was cracked, but it played Traoré's voice. Clearly, Ayanda listened, then asked, "Gogo, why is that man crying?" Her grandmother paused, then said softly, "Because someone finally told the truth." Ayanda didn't know what the African Union was or what sovereignty meant, but she knew hunger. She knew what it felt like to see her mother cry because there was no money for bread. And when Traoré said, "No child should sleep with pain in their belly while gold leaves our soil," Ayanda understood everything. The next day, she drew a picture of Traoré in her school notebook. She wrote underneath, "He remembers us," and she wasn't alone. Across South Africa, children were drawing, writing, and responding not to politics, but to hope. Traoré had never physically stepped into South Africa, but he had entered its heart. Meanwhile, in Nairobi, Kenya's foreign minister was walking back and forth. The video had gone viral across East Africa too. People were marching with printed copies of the letter. Universities were holding forums. Artists were painting murals of Traoré with the words, "Let's build a great Africa." The minister picked up the phone and called Pretoria. "We want in," he said. Ramaphosa's advisor was confused. "In on what?" "Whatever this is," the minister replied. "Africa has needed this for decades. Don't let it fade as just another viral moment." Ramaphosa, still shaken, agreed to a video meeting. That same week, 12 African countries joined a private digital summit. It wasn't public. It wasn't on TV. All because of one letter. Traoré was invited. He didn't wear his military uniform. He wore a simple African shirt with the Burkina Faso flag stitched on the chest. "We are not here to debate power," he said. "We are here to remember the promise we made to our people and forgot." Somewhere in that meeting, a delegate from Ghana began to cry. "This is what Nkrumah dreamed of," he whispered. But one important African figure still hadn't responded. That morning, Ramaphosa was given another envelope. No cameras, no live coverage. It was from Zinzi Mandela, daughter of the late Nelson Mandela. Inside was a handwritten note. "My father once said, 'It always seems impossible until it is done.' I watched you break down on TV. I didn't see weakness. I saw Mandela in you, and I saw the spirit of Africa in Captain Traoré." Ramaphosa's hands began to shake again. Zinzi had included something else, a scanned copy of a note Mandela wrote before his death. In the margins, he had scribbled, "One day, a young lion will rise in the West. He will speak not for power, but for the voiceless. The continent must listen to him." Ramaphosa sat in silence, staring out the window. Was Ibrahim Traoré that lion? Before anyone could fully process what was happening, a new announcement spread. Across the continent, Captain Traoré would speak live to all of Africa, not as a soldier, but as a servant of the people. What would he say next? The world was about to find out. The date was set, Friday, 8 p.m. West African time. Millions gathered on TVs, phones, and projectors. In rural villages, elders pulled out old radios, hoping for signal. The world had heard of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, but they had never heard him like this. The broadcast began in silence. Then Traoré appeared. He wore no uniform, just a plain African shirt with his sleeves rolled up. His face was calm but serious, lit softly by warm lights. He spoke quietly to every mother who has ever gone to bed hungry, to every father who left home for a job that never existed, to every child who thinks they must leave Africa to matter. He paused. You could hear a pin drop across the continent. You were never forgotten. You were silenced. And I have come to break the silence. People stared, shocked. This wasn't a political speech. It felt like a confession from a son of Africa. Even Ramaphosa, watching from Pretoria, looked emotional. Then Traoré asked a question that changed everything. What if the real poverty is not in our wallets, but in our unity? He hadn't even reached his second point yet. Traoré looked straight at the camera. I want to tell you a story I've never told publicly. Everyone leaned in. When I was 14, I saw my neighbor collapse in the street. His daughter ran for help, but there was no doctor, no clinic, just dust and silence. He died in her arms. I remember how the mother screamed. He closed his eyes for a moment. That man wasn't a soldier or a leader. He was just African. But no news covered it. No cameras showed it. Why? Because to the world, African pain doesn't trend. Viewers began crying. In homes, taxis, and buses, people wiped their faces. I promised myself that day if I ever stood on a stage, I wouldn't speak about my success. I'd speak about his death. Because, until his story matters, none of us matter. A woman in Nigeria tweeted, "I can't stop crying. He's speaking for all of us." Traoré held up the letter he had sent to Ramaphosa. This wasn't just a letter, it was a mirror. And tonight, I'm asking every African to look into it. He still wasn't done. The final part shook African politics. Traoré leaned forward. Here is what I believe. If Africa is to rise, we cannot wait for others to save us. No one is coming, and they never were. He reached under the desk and brought out a new document, stamped and bound. This is my proposal. A Pan-African coalition. Voluntary, independent, no. Outside help. Built by us, for us. Gasps were heard in homes, radio stations, even prisons where inmates were watching. We'll start small. 10 countries, 1 plan, shared resources, education and defense. No puppets, no middlemen, only Africans at the table. WhatsApp. Groups exploded. Is this real? He's doing it. Where do we sign? In Lusaka, a bus conductor stopped, turned up the radio, and said, "We're witnessing history, guys." Back in the studio, Traoré gave one last promise. "I will not live forever, but if we build this together, Africa will." He bowed his head. The screen faded to black. Across the continent, people stood up not to clap, but because they felt something inside them rise, hope. The next day, a photo went viral. It was a classroom in northern Mozambique. Dirt floors, wooden benches, no roof. But on the blackboard, a teacher had written, "Let's build a great Africa." Captain Ibrahim Traoré children sat in the heat, notebooks on their laps, eyes full of light. The teacher, Miss Elena, spoke into a borrowed phone for a local journalist. "We've waited so long for someone to speak to us," she said. "Not about aid, not about donations, about dignity." Her students drew maps of Africa with no borders. Instead, they wrote, "One people, one dream." The image was shared millions of times. In Uganda, a university renamed its debate hall the Traoré Room. In Ghana, market women chanted, "No more crumbs from the world. We bake our own bread now." But while the praise grew, quiet forces started to worry how far Traoré's words might go. In South Africa, Ramaphosa sat alone in his office, staring at one line from the letter. "You do not lead Africans with force. You lead them with feeling." Then something surprising happened. A car pulled up at the Union buildings in Pretoria, no escort, no appointment. Inside was a young woman from Burkina Faso. She held a folder and a letter. The president's assistant ran into his office. "Sir, you need to see this." Ramaphosa walked down to the lobby himself. She stood confidently. Her name was Fatou. Traoré, not his wife, not his sister. "My father died a farmer," she said. "But my brother," was his voice. She was Ibrahim Traoré's younger sister. She hadn't come to demand anything but to share a dream. "He asked me to deliver this to you in person." The president opened the folder. Inside were many letters from children, farmers, students, and elders from across West Africa, handwritten, stained with sweat and red dust. One simply said, "Tell South Africa we believe in them." Ramaphosa looked at Fatou. "Why now?" he asked. Her reply was quiet, but powerful, because history doesn't knock twice. Africa is knocking now. The president nodded. He knew what needed to be done. But first, he had to return to where it all started, exactly 21 days after receiving the letter on live TV. President Cyril Ramaphosa went back to the same studio. Same lights, same cameras, same desk, but this time he wasn't nervous. The producer counted down. "Mr. President, we're live in 3, 2, 1. Ramaphosa looked into the camera, calm. 3 weeks ago. I opened a letter that broke me not because it was harsh, but because it was honest. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, didn't he attack me? He reminded me of promises we've buried under bureaucracy." The screen behind him read, "Africa Rising, an invitation to build." Ramaphosa continued, "Today I accept his invitation. South Africa. We'll co-lead the Pan-African Coalition. We will send not just leaders, but teachers, builders, doctors, people who carry Africa in their bones." Millions watching began cheering. In Johannesburg, crowds flooded the streets. In Ouagadougou, families cried with pride. But this wasn't just a speech. It was a seed, and it grew faster than anyone expected. 3 days after Ramaphosa's second speech, something unexpected happened. It began in Kigali, then Lagos, then Addis Ababa, then Gaborone. Thousands of people started marching not in protest, but in unity. Old men in traditional clothes, women with babies, teenagers waving Pan-African flags. They held signs saying, "The letter woke us up. Africa first, Africa forever. We are one people." This movement had no official name, no sponsors, no celebrities, just the people. In Cape Town, someone held a large photo of Ramaphosa crying. In Bamako, a big banner showed Traoré's words, "If unity is our burden, then division is our curse." And in Soto, 10-year-old Ayanda stood on a wooden box and read part of the letter out loud. People gathered and cried around her. She was only a child. The streets had spoken. This was no longer politics. This was a reawakening. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat at his desk, watching live footage of the marchers. He turned to his advisor. "I only wrote one letter." The advisor replied, and it became Africa's voice. 1 month later, 10 African presidents gathered in person for the first time in years. In an open-air summit in Accra, Ghana. No red carpets, no helicopters, no outsiders, just a long wooden table under the African sky. They called it the Unity Table. President Ramaphosa sat beside Ibrahim Traoré. There were no prepared speeches, just stories. Stories of closed schools reopening. Stories of farmers sharing seeds across borders. Stories of Africans finally negotiating fair prices for their own resources. Traoré stood up. "Today, we don't sign a contract. We make a promise to never lead with ego or sell our people for comfort." He reached into his coat and pulled out the original letter, folded, a bit torn, but still whole. "This letter doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to every African who dares to hope." He handed it to a young girl from a nearby village, watching in the crowd. She held it like treasure. The summit ended with no clapping, just silence, the kind that follows something sacred. Africa was no longer asking to be seen. Africa was standing tall, together. 1 year later, a statue was unveiled in Ouagadougou. It wasn't of a president or a soldier. It was a sculpture of an open envelope, with words flying out like birds. At the base, it read, "One letter, one continent, one dream." Schools now teach the letter in literature classes. Small towns paint murals of children holding hands across African flags. And in a small clinic in Limpopo, a nurse whispered to a newborn baby, "You came at the right time. Africa is awake now." President Ramaphosa visited Burkina Faso, quietly, no media, no press. He and Traoré walked alone through a garden. "You didn't just write a letter," Ramaphosa said quietly. "You rewrote history," Traoré smiled. "No, we all did." As the sun set behind them, the sound of children singing the new Pan-African anthem echoed in the distance. It wasn't perfect. The journey had only begun. But something was different now. Africa had remembered itself. Asterisk, if this story touched you, made you cry, gave you hope, or reminded you who we really are, as Africans do, 3 powerful things. Like this video so more people see it. Subscribe so you never miss powerful African stories. Comment below. Let's build a great Africa together. This wasn't just a video. It was a letter to you, to us, to Africa.